みんながいなくなったら、そしたらあなたはどうなるの?
We begin Lineage and Legacies after a 6-month time skip from the conclusion of the previous story's events, with everyone trying to get everyone else hitched.
あなたももうすぐ20歳。身を固めることを考えてもいい年齢です。
As usual, not even kidding. Though, for Carrie to be asking at least makes sense. After all, she completely failed as a mother thanks to just going along with everything Aston did. Being a grandmother is probably her only shot to do any parental job right at this point. You might remember from part 1 of these episodes that I said this same criticism of the character, and how Carrie herself comes off as someone who suffered Stockholm Syndrome. And this is actually where I get this idea from. As one of the first things the Lineage and Legacies expansion does is depict for use that flashback scene I detailed back then, of Carrie coming to Lament over their arranged marriage, her and Aston having a horrible first meeting, and then him abandoning her there, unable to leave, for a month. And it's just more of the same bullshit that tries and fails to frame Aston as better than he was. Moreover, the entire length of Lineage and Legacies follows the same pattern, as the entire story extension is all about shipping. How each of the characters has to think about finding a significant other and settling down to bring forth the next generation to carry on for them. And it's very poorly handled the entire way through, treating the entire matter of kids as if it's the responsibility of people that are just figuring out their lives to instantaneously spawn children to maintain, I hate this phrase, but it's accurate, the domestic supply of infants. A message that isn't as awful as you think it might be from the perspective of the originally intended Japanese audience, due to their decades-long birth rate decline that is actually the consequence of a social-cultural failure to have any semblance of a work-life balance that would allow for kids, alongside ingrained corporate sexism that discourages young adults from finding a partner and generating offspring in the first place, as it places too significant a burden on those individuals to actually bring new life into the world with any semblance of a conscience, as you can't support having children on a single parent salary, and yet mothers are frequently driven out of the Japan workforce. That policy in and of itself is what keeps screwing the country over. And America has been affected by that more and more itself, where America's population now only remains as stable as it is due to immigration. There's a lot of people like me who neither want nor can stand kids that would make for terrible parents if they were forced to have them. For the problem with insisting on us having them is, we don't owe you that. That should be our decision, and it should be made with those we want to be with, as opposed to them being born unwanted, as forcing them into an unloved existence that cannot support them is nothing but plain cruel. And there are people out there that should not have kids to begin with due to how badly they would fuck it up. Austin, the perfect example of one himself. Atop that is the additional compounding error in that I and many others that played these games do not ship any of the main cast members together. And yet stories like these are always formatted so that the only real viable options that would be narratively satisfying would be those among those cast members, instead of a newly introduced rando that no one wants nor would be appealing. To justify two people pairing up, you have to have constant exposures to their interactions and affections for one another that build up over time. If you do not do this, then people are more likely to accept two people that have some elements of commonality or compatibility as a better match for one another over the ones you present as wanting to be together. I kind of find it worse with media that makes such affections a one-sided thing, where we get numerous confirmations that one person is head over heels for another, gotten to the place where they can show healthy affections or overtures to courtship with their prospective paramours, only for that chance at a relationship to be entirely stolen from them by someone who was never presented as being interested in the subject of affections before, out of complete fucking nowhere. There's not even romance blocking that mess. That's deliberate narrative malfeasance on the part of the writers to deny something they themselves had been setting up for no excusable recourse. And this reflects a larger problem that has existed for a long time with Japanese media, that two people getting together is treated as the end point of an evolving narrative instead of a midpoint or transitionary point in one's lives where more story can be told with them, just in a different form. Even in stories that are explicitly about romance or two people wanting to be with the other, Japanese series don't often like to depict actual romance within them, either having two people get together before the story's events, or learn to like another or accept the feelings they develop for another until the point they actually officially are a couple, and then it's over without doing anything with it. It's rare to the point of being nearly non-existent that the actual process of dating or them being actively romantically involved is showcased for the main cast. What we usually get instead is a bunch of meet-cute romance flags that show a development of affections and dynamic between two people that are supposed to evolve to a love confession by the end. And then they either date or are broken up irreparably by outside events only after the story consequently ends. This, once again, to go back to my Graces to Code Geass comparison list, is the irritation with Code Geass's movie timeline, due to all the paramour flags between Lelouch and Callan that are essentially tied into irrefutable narrative events and motivations behind their actions that are just cut out despite their importance in the movies, and ignored elsewhere to just make it so the canonically asexual pizza gremlin is now the round peg shoved into the square hole, as she largely lacks those same narrative essential flags as she wasn't supposed to possess them to begin with. Deliberately burning those flags generally is not taken well when they're shown to happen. While them screwing over Kalulu shippers is not the main grievance with those movies, the explicit intent for the staff to make Lelouch go off with CC is symptomatic to the larger problem of them not approaching the movie timeline of that franchise with intent to resolve the larger narrative failings that had been long voiced with their story, but to double down on them and make it so no more stories could be told. Graces, by proxy of its characters that are allegorical to Code Geass ones, however, do not have this same problem. They are genuine in their intent to have been from the start to fulfill those flags. It's just because of their insistence on scapegoating Aspel that no one wants them to be fulfilled. And they were generally trying to fulfill them. Graces does have all those narrative flags throughout its events for Aspel and Cheria. Once more, the grand majority of them in the core game detailed through side quests. Because, once again, it is impossible for Graces to actually tell its true, damn essential story segments through anything but the side quests for some ridiculous reason. But because of Cheria's prior conduct towards Aspel, I don't ship them. I want them to avoid what came off throughout too much of the game as an abusive relationship. And this extension likewise even more forcefully pushing them back together grated on not just myself, but a large portion of the player base, because thanks to how badly they fucked up the earlier chapters of the game, we largely did not want them to get together, despite it already being established canon that they, the characters, want to. But every time they present the flags that would resolve the interpersonal divide between them properly, that would thus allow it, and get us in the audience on board the idea, they screw it up. With the condemnation of the arc here being that the writer of the story strangled the two with their red string of fate. And this isn't a one-off condemnation either. I had this same criticism of Tales of Symphonia, where I felt they handled the main romantic pairing of the story between Lloyd and Colette so badly that I didn't give a damn about it. It was so weird to me to see twice in a row with the franchise that I dug a bit deeper into this, and it looks like somehow, some way, the grand majority of the Tales series has consistently botched their romance arcs, either having that same pairing rejection that happens between Aspel and Cheria for players, or finding more appeal from another paramour option that isn't what the developers intended, such as how I vastly preferred the idea of Lloyd and Sheena hooking up in Symphonia. I've never really experienced this so badly. Usually, I am a person that lives vicariously through the romances in the media I ingest. I like the new paths of character exploration a Paramore opens up for cast members. Hell, it's why romances are relegated for the end is actually something that really pisses me off these days in media. As two characters dating is a story you can tell in and of itself. Yet it's one of the biggest things missing that I want to see in stories I normally like. And if I do see it when it's not just a completion checkmark, then I have to be concerned that it's going to turn into a death flag for one of the involved, which in the real world does nothing but discourage the audience from seeking such a Paramore out. It's actually why I really like the series Love After World Domination. I actually have the Blu-ray of it, but it's buried behind my Shiranui on that shelf. As it avoids that crap by its literal premise being, what if a Sentai hero and a villainous general were in a relationship? And presents them being in that relationship and the hurdles it throws at them, which makes for a unique dynamic. You have an idea how rare that is? More of this, please! Where the protagonists hook up and spend the story being a power couple while figuring out how to be the best boy or girlfriend they possibly can be for the other. Another modern example being the evolving relationship of Iruma and Amori in Welcome to Demon School Iruma-kun, where they have been on several dates that are spaced out between various arcs, and their dates are themselves the romance flags for the growth and development of their affections for the other that just all comes off naturally. As while they have not had an outright confession, at least at the time of recording this in 2023, the joy they feel by simply being in the other's presence and the character growth their relationship helps incite between the both of them doesn't require the specific words be spoken just yet. Yet that is an actual progressive romance arc. None of that is intrusive to the plot, but further accents how Iruma has been banished to the netherworld, but found everything he had been denied among humans, even love, from embracing his life in this new realm. So the confession of love we presume to be coming between them eventually instead becomes the final step taken after they've already been shown to be dating and have something special between them. It takes that existing pattern of the romance flags leading to a confession at the end and actually presents with those flags the actual experience of dating that is part of getting to know a person you like better, which should have been allowed to be part of such stories, but so very rarely is. And I cite both as what I want to see more of done, as I am very tired of getting jerked around on that, or having to go to freaking Battle Harem series to actually see two or more characters who care about each other actually be shown to date, or present them as having an evolving relationship that goes beyond saying, I like you. As harem anime are the other diametric extreme on this, as even if you get past the confession stage, you then have the problem of competitors for the title preventing the interpersonal dynamic from developing between the main paramours. I look at series I have, and I don't see a lot of exceptions to those consistent ways that all plays out. Either the confession is at the end, or them being together is obfuscated by the presence of other people or outside factors. But the worst it gets in Grace's case is, for some insane reason, the story only now begins to try and push together Pascal, the best character in the game, with Hubert, which even in this section remains the worst character in the game. And while the reason I'm not on board Aspel and Cherry getting together is on the basis of her never apologizing for her mistreatment of him, Pascal and Hubert literally have no chemistry. None at all. Yeah, there's the argument one can make of them being two diametric extremes that cancel each other out, and Pascal needs someone like Hubert to look after her and ground her so she doesn't end up harming herself in the long term, but they really don't have any interpersonal chemistry to validate it for the audiences. And moreover, a paramour is not a caretaker or minder for an eccentric, which is what shipping the two would make Hubert into for Pascal, which doesn't work because the two, despite being intelligent, don't have any common crossover. A military scholar is not an inventor or engineer. A lover is not a maid or nanny reminding one to care for oneself. They're someone that should make a person want to put their best foot forward. You're granted the drive to become the best version of yourself because they are present as part of your life. And you feel like you have to be better as that is how you show your gratitude for them being there. And I don't get that from them, as Hubert's awkward attempts to confess only highlight all the traits that make him disliked to begin with, while Pascal's obliviousness to everything that is an invention is taken to the extreme. This genuinely doesn't work. Richard and Malik thankfully have paramour arcs for them avoided, though it is mentioned that both are considered eligible bachelors, which, thankfully, Malik can shrug off as the one woman he loves is long dead, while Richard's the king. He has to take the time to vet his potential suitors, so they aren't focused on. As for Sophie, well, her arc in this is different. For as you saw from the cold open I provided, she is becoming more and more aware of the reality that humans and other living things only have a finite lifespan, while she was designed to function for as long as Eleth exists in the world. And even with Lambda sealed within Aspel, he's not going to be there for her forever.
私も人になれたらみんなに置いていかれない？どうしたら人になれるの？教えて、アスベル。
それは
涙出ない。とても悲しくても私はみんなみたいに泣けないんだね。私もみんなと一緒が良かった。
たずうつろな心のまま残されたものは残酷な話だな。限りある人の身でどうやってプロトスヘイスを孤独から救う気だ。
それは
悩みが濃く深くなったな。お前は悩みの中から答えを見つけられるか。人の身でせいぜいあがくがいい。楽しませてもらうぞ。
残されたものはただ永遠を生きる。
And no, this game does not at any point ever attempt to ship Sophie and Lambda, thank God. While enemies to lovers is a trope that exists, that's not exactly what one wants to consider when both are mentally children despite them both being over 1,000 years old. Though again, this whole arc with Sophie here is once again an example of the contrast the game has with one of its inspirations, as this lament of immortality is far better handled as it's from the perspective of someone who still is, or rather, has learned to be, emotionally human, as opposed to the lament of someone that chose to abandon and become numb to their humanity. And really, Aspel solves this the only way he really can, by formally adopting Sophie as his daughter. That though Aspel may one day leave her, they still have decades by which to be together as family. And even after that, she will always have her adopted siblings and their children to live with, look after, and protect as long as she will still continue to function. The curse of the immortal may be for them to go on existing and outlast all they know, but that does not mean that new connections, new friends, and new loved ones and family cannot come to exist for them. It just requires them to continue to care and nurture those lives, like a tree rising up to protect more fragile blossoms from the harshness of a storm. And for some, that can be a comfort, not a curse. But her ruminations over mortality and the various paramour plots are punctuated by the appearance of a new wave of monsters from Fodra that had begun a mass invasion of Athenia. These Nova monsters require the group reunite, with Richard formally joining the party again as a combat member due to his experiences with Lambda. These monsters so strong, it actually required Lambda itself wake up and grant the group a new combat mechanic that speeds up our ability to strike at rates far faster than the monsters can counter. Well, that was the intent. In reality, the mechanic for me has been present the entire time, as when you boot up a New Game Plus save file, that mechanic is instead available from the start. And it's required because each of the Nova monsters, on top of them hijacking control of any of Lambda's remnant monsters that haven't been hunted down, can undergo rapid evolution so their previous weaknesses entirely vanish if they're left alive for too long, making them a threat that will consume the world if not stopped ASAP, as these monsters were what truly doomed Fodra. And it's only when Aspel and company went to Fodra that the force behind them became aware of them, and Fodra's long-dormant Lastalia core began to release power again. We return to Fodra and find that plant life has begun to return to the planets all on its own due to the release of Eleth, the monsters appearing to live peacefully among the flora, meaning it is not they themselves that are coming to attack them, but something is sending them there. And that something would normally have her hair up in twin tails, but that's Sophie's hairstyle in this game. This is the Little Queen, an avatar manifestation of Fodra's core, and the actual beings that caused the planet to be reduced to a dead world. And she is voiced by Yoshino Nanjo, who, as discussed, 2 years ago now, played secondary main character Shirabe Tsukiyomi in Symphogear G onwards. And yeah, I can hear it. But yeah, we get context to Little Queen's role in all that, which all goes back to the malicious actions of Emerald. In her zeal to kill Lambda, which she had scapegoated as responsible for the monster attacks upon Fodra, she instead had captured one of the Little Queens when it manifested, somehow, and took a sample of its essence, as it showed itself to be in the same type of spiritual form as Lambda, for her to then devise a means of killing the former. That ended up being her final fuck-up, for due to her scapegoating Lambda, she missed entirely that she had somehow subdued the actual being responsible for spawning the monsters, while Lambda, as said before, was the envoy intended by Fodra to open dialogue. And, well, Emerald's actions against both of them, that was the final straw. For when the Little Queen eventually woke up, it didn't mince words. It outright slaughtered everyone it could find on the planet. So once again, we are back to dealing with the consequences of the crimes of the mother. As for that sample Emerald took, well, what do you all think happened to it? Yeah, Sophie, meet your other mother? Or do we want to say sister in this?
一人になりたくないんでしょ。みんないつかいなくなる。それはとても悲しい。それはとても怖い。助けてほしい。不安で仕方がない。救いを求める心を私が永遠に癒してあげる。
Okay, yeah, let's say sisters. The Little Queens are all just manifestations of the true Fodra Queen. So since Sophie was in part created from the essence of one of the queens, they all recognize her as being one of them. And thus, they want her back.
あなたの痛みを私に変えてあげる。終わりなき時を。
And that forms a far stronger backbone of this extension. Who is your family? As Sophie does not want to be alone. The queens are offering her exactly what she seems to want, except it's still without the people she wants to spend her entire existence with, who the queens are trying to drag her away from. And there's not even a guarantee from this that they'd stop attacking just if she went back to them. As they openly hate humans and just by the group's presence with Sophie, they will not stop attacking, exhausting the group until they gain the capacity to mind control Sophie into forcefully joining her. That doesn't show them as being on the up and up, but wanting what they want without regards to any other being. And if they're like this and angry at everyone not of their groupthink because of Emerald's actions, fair enough. it's another crime that has to be cleaned up. But subjugating the will of another who they've not told the context of their actions just to be part of them, that's not lending credence to their goals, as it means they could just wipe Sophie's memory of those she values and then kill everyone on Affinia off. It's only because of Lambda's power once again that they managed to escape them, as even though it's only been 6 months, the positive emotions experienced through Aspel has helped it begin to mend its own mind. From seeing more recordings of the Little Queen's genocide 1,000 years ago, it's found that they can stop the influx of monsters and the Little Queens entirely by shutting down Fodra's core, which they can do by using Lambda to absorb the Lastalia's Eleth, which would deprive the Queens of their power. Which infers this was the point in the first place, and Lambda and the Queens were birthed by Fodra at the same time. Lambda dropped into humanity's lap while the Queens created the monsters, with the infernal intent, as I've said, to see if humanity were worth saving and would be able to understand each other. And if they were worthy of salvation, Lambda could drain the core to cut off the Queens and save humanity. And none of that occurred because one woman's envy ruined that entirely. The problem with that, however, is doing such with Aspel as he is now would kill him outright. If he at any point resisted Lambda, the backlash would literally atomize him. It would only be possible if he let himself be subsumed by Lambda as Richard was. And no one wants Aspel to go through with it, as Lambda could easily double-cross them. And the concern is legitimate, after all they went through with Richard as its host. But again, my position on this, and I think such is the one the game is trying to sell here this time, is Lambda got as bad as it did in Richard due to the negative emotional feedback loop Lambda's and Richard's experiences inflicted upon the other. Aspel, thanks to getting away from his abusive father, has not had those same hindrances. At most, he has self-loathing towards himself because of all the shit he was scapegoated for, and not being able to save people in a pinch when things would spiral out of control. But his perseverance is the most admirable trait that allows him to keep walking even in spite of those burdens, which I think Lambda has come to understand, so it is not as burdened by its own grief either anymore. This punctuated from meaningful words each share with Aspel and Sophie that Lambda comments on, that helps to shape it, and their opinion in the off chance that this does end up killing Aspel. And as Aspel tells Sophie of his dream of just wanting to make the world a happier place bit by bit, Sophie finally realizes what she, as an immortal, can do. Carry on that memory and goal.
どうしてだろう。ずっと不安だったのが嘘みたい。アスベルはいなくなっても、いなくなるわけじゃないんだね。ずっとつながっていくんだね。そのつながりを見守っていきたい。それはきっと私にしかできないことだから。
お前はすごいな。子供だと思ってたけど。
ラムダ、あなたに大事なことを言いに来たの。
消すとでも脅しに来たのか。そうするとこの男も一緒に消えるが。
逆だよ。
どういうことだ。
私はあなたとはもう戦わない。
With that, the Lastalia shaft of Fodra is one massive slog, due to Fodra being so much ridiculously larger than Affinia. Though what makes it strange is, while like with the Affinia Lastalia, the constructed regions eventually give way to rock, the inner regions of Fodra's core are like as if an entire planet exists inside the planet, with how much there is actual life down here. Life all stolen from the world for reasons Fodra's core has just never managed to successfully communicate, nor this game represent clearly to justify its actions. And I think that's part of my problem with the Fodra Queen, as beyond the broad strokes of why humans suck that are ubiquitous to villain monologues, well, the Queens are never given an actual motivation or reason for doing what they do. They're just an antagonist that seems to want something from Sophie, but their hatred of humanity is horribly explored and explained to the point of being so stereotypical and overdone in JRPGs to be irritating to see again. I again looked up more Tales games as I was writing this, and this has been a repetitive problem coming from them for a while, where they just kept doing this same speech ad nauseum by their end bosses, but with less and less validity for the argument as those end bosses become more and more removed from experiences with humanity in each repetition. Like the reason I gave that it's Emerald's fault, that is largely speculation determined from previous information about Emerald's crimes, combined with the context the story provides over why they want Sophie, and the revelations in this expansion about Sophie being developed from actual samples of the queens. In story on its own, they've got nothing. Lambda being the intended savior of Fodrans if they treated it well. Again, my speculation giving its power set and story origins. As all the game gives is the same old hat staple that humanity sucks and the world is better off without them, as their presence ruins the environment. Yet ignores that humanity as something that was born from the environment is not a cancer to that environment on its own. Are we supposed to be mindless animals? 'Cause, hate to ruin your thesis, but animals can screw over the environment too. Look up what an invasive species is sometime, 'cause a lot of those are not introduced by just man moving them around, but them finding their ways on their own to new locations where they can breed like mad and destroy their own sustainability, which we as rational thinking beings at least try to prevent where possible. For as is proven time and again in the real world, the worst environmental damage we actually experience is not from the vast majority of people, but the 1% crowd in control of corporations that care about wealth and power regardless of consequences. And to blame the entirety of a group for the sins of a fraction of their number is the height of hypocrisy, which the queens themselves showcase when Sophie asks them to stop this, and they decide to just kill her for not going along with their demands. Even now, the game ruins its own thesis about humans being horrid as they're not the ones that ruined the planet and made it lifeless. That was the actions of the queens, because they overreacted. So their broad strokes blame game doesn't really even work as it's back to that same damn scapegoat problem the storyline has had the entire frickin' time. You need to provide a specific reason why you're condemning someone that actually applies to an event that happened, or call out a pattern of behavior to showcase your problem with them. When I spent the Code Geass videos slamming Suzaku, I brought my receipts that showcased why he was an unacknowledged hypocritical monster that got away with his crimes. The same with Aston and Emerald in these videos about Graces. I presented my evidence taken from the context of what the game provides. Whereas the queens don't have a single one to cite. So we can only speculate from the context of the side content, which massively weakens any case as the only reason why we are here now at this point of the game is because they keep attacking the people of Athenia without any cause those people are aware of. And the ones we presume are not the full story. The little queens all fuse back into the true Fodra queen, who tries to just kill us with sheer power, only for Lambda to block it and disrupt her abilities, allowing us to attack her physical form. This, even with endgame level characters, is a full-on 3-minute battle that's a hard press to beat, and her own attacks are wild, but eventually the Fodra queen is pacified. It tries to go for the core, but Aspel gives himself to Lambda, allowing it to absorb the core's power, and with it, the malice the queen itself had become infested by, just as Lambda had been. This fixes whatever the Fodrians screwed up centuries ago, and in time life will now return to the planet naturally. But to properly purify it, Lambda will have to perform its original duty and stay with the core to do so, releasing Aspel from his status as its host, and making a promise to Sophie to meet again.
我は一人にはなるまい。永久を生きる少女がいる限り。
私？
我の行く末はお前が見守っていてくれ。プロトス・ヘイス。我はフォドラと共に夢を見よう。その夢の中でフォドラと語り合い分かり合おうとこの者が我にそうしたよ。 そして再び目覚めた時、フォドラと共に見ていこうと思う。この世界。
And this is what the group likewise tries to convey to the last queen, who expects destruction from her failure, and yet instead, Sophie takes the lessons of Aspel's actions to the greatest heart, and offers her hand to show her that there's more to the world than what they have viewed. And with it, Geppetto's doll is allowed to become a real girl. The story returning home and wrapping up its romance flags with it officially getting Aspel and Cheria to confess their feelings and get them together. You know, even if I'm not on board the pairing due to how the storyline itself screwed up the delivery of it, this is still a better, more satisfying ending on an interpersonal character level than Illusion of the Resurrection even pretended to attempt. For once again this year, that is how bad that movie generally is.
ずっと。男の子は自分の庭に植えて毎日世話をしました。すると迷子の種は小さい可愛い花を咲かせたの。その後種はどうなったと思う？今度はお星様になってみんなを見守ってるの。自分も見守ってもらった分のお返しなんだって。
The people that exist within it may change, the world may someday end, but the will and dreams of those who matter will always be passed along, traveling ever onwards to your eternity. Tales of Graces could have been so much better than it is, and no one I've talked to that is a Tales fan has been able to figure out why it has the problems it does, though I have done my best to quantify what they are. For what detracts from it really does keep making you not want to experience the game, because it keeps compounding its own damn errors unnecessarily. And while I've explained the grievances from a storytelling perspective, and tried to contrast them a bit with the Code Geass allegory the characters bear to show that there are good ideas in here, I've been avoiding talking about the individual responsible for them. The game's sole screenwriter, Daisuke Kiga. And the reason I haven't is I have near zero experience with anything their credit is creating. When you see the writing work of someone over and over again, you're more capable of pointing out their tells and quirks in their productions alongside their strengths and weaknesses. And when I have those experiences, I have tried to share them in my videos I produce as they better explain the thought processes behind them, assuming executive meddling isn't screwing them over. Kiga, however, has all of three works to their name: Tales of Graces, and the Tales of Xillia duology. That's it, and I have never played either Xillia game. Alexis has, but I talked with her about every problem I had, and according to her, none of the issues Graces has was present in Xillia at all. So we have no frame of reference to work with to try and figure out what might have been up with Kiga on this game for it to bear the problems it does. For all the game's problems come from the one I said at the start, it deliberately blaming the wrong parties for the actions of others, and escalating that scapegoating to ridiculous degrees while never allowing those at fault or mistaken to be acknowledged as such. The game wants to be a story of a boy taking up the responsibilities and duties he was past, but all he really inherits is the problems solely his predecessor was the cause of, and not true, systemic failings that showcase a larger problem with the way the world itself is run. It was always just one asshole that was making things bad for Athenia, and one selfish witch on Fodra that caused a genocide to occur from her pissing off two entities of inhuman nature. That's it. All the story really needed to do was to correct that in order to get everyone else it was intending to do back on course. But instead the deflection is taken to such a ridiculous degree, it generally burns the goodwill it's trying to build up amidst the cast members. I really feel this could have been better handled in the grand scheme had Hubert been Lambda's host. As while saving a brother from a malicious influence is a cliche, it's a cliche because it works. And it resolves the issues regarding Aspel's scapegoating much earlier. But it's really the lacking apology and the refusal to actually talk many of these issues out that damns them, instead making the presumption that they are all resolved. The mess with the little queens at the end really only served to reinforce these points due to their own rationales not being given, only read into due to how much humans suck has become a shorthand for lazy writers instead of ascribing any nuance to the matter. So much that makes me dislike this game could easily have been fixed. But at the very least, after this game was in the backlog to do for 10 freaking years, I am finally done with it. But I doubt I will be revisiting it, and with me disliking both Tales games I have played, well, it doesn't exactly endear me to doing more of them in the future. I might change my mind and do Tales of Vesperia for reasons, but don't be surprised if I just don't get to it and skip it entirely.